back to another episode of Simplify Math. So, I'm here to make math just a little bit simpler in your life. Today's episode here, we're going to talk about my second favorite F word, factoring. So, what is factoring? Let's get started with that. So, factoring is a way that we can solve what's called a quadratic expression or a quadratic equation that looks something like this. X squared plus 7x, let's say minus 30. So a quadratic expression is like this. An equation, we would just add an equal sign next to it. But if I'm wanting to solve this, let's say I go ahead and add that equal sign next to it here, equals 0. If I was looking to solve this quadratic equation here, I couldn't just solve it by isolating my x values, because if you notice, there are two x values, and if you remember from your Algebra 1 class, you cannot combine these two x values together because they are different exponents. They are not what we call like terms. So, in order for us to solve this, we have to do what is called factoring. So I'm going to break factoring down to its very basics. So what we're looking for here is we're looking for something, we can take this and we're going to put it in a form kind of like this, where we have two sets of parentheses. So if you think about these two sets of parentheses and we're going all the way back to foiling, normally we would take this first one and we would multiply it by the x, so x times x, that's where we get our x squared from. Then we would take our x and multiply it by something that's missing right here. This spot here we're missing, and this spot here we're missing. So that's the numbers that we're trying to find. So in order for me to start factoring, I'm going to read this a little bit backwards. Normally I read things from left to right like a book. This time we're going to read it backwards. We're actually going to read it from right to left. So I'm going to start with this 30. So what we're looking for here is factors of 30. Factors, once again, mean things that multiply to get me to 30. So if I think of all the things that multiply to get me 30, I can write them over here. All the things that multiply to get me 30 are 30 and 1. We have 15 and 2. We have 10 and 3. Then we jump down to 6 and 5, and those are all the factors of 30. So what I'm looking for here are factors of 30 that do whatever this sign is. Now this sign here says subtract, so I'm trying to look for these pairs and find out which one is going to subtract to give me 7. So if I look at my pairs over here, the obvious one that subtracts to give me 7 is going to be this pair right here. 10 minus 3 gives me that 7. So I'm going to start plugging these in. So 10 and 3. Now it does not matter which order you put these in. Multiplication is associative. So it does not matter what order you put those in. You can put them in any order there. So I have my numbers, but if you notice, we're missing our signs next. So our signs is where it gets a little bit tricky, but here's kind of a shortcut on this. If I'm going to put my signs in here, I'm looking at this number right here, okay? This sign is going to be my telling point. What I'm looking at is the larger of these two numbers between 10 and 3 have to get that sign. So the obvious answer here, my larger number is 10, which means it is going to get that plus sign. So from a positive 10, how do I get to 7? Do I do plus or minus 3? And that's how we look at see what our second sign is. So 10 obviously minus 3 is going to give me that 7 value. So there's our two factors. We're done factoring it. Now if we're going to solve this, what we can do is take both of our factors and set them equal to 0. Because if I take x plus 10, for example, and go ahead and set it equal to 0. In solving for x, I subtract the 10 from both sides and I get negative 10. So it doesn't matter what this value comes out. If I take negative 10 and I plug it into this x, the whole thing is going to give me 0. I can also take it and plug it in back into my original equation. If I take negative 10 and plug it in up here and solve this, I would end up getting 0, which therefore solves my equation. But not only am I going to do it with this factor, I'm also going to do it with this factor. X minus 3 equals 0, and I'm going to once again add 3 to both sides to give me x equals 3. So once again, we can take x equals 3 and plug it in to both of these x values up here, and when I do, I would come out to get 0. So that's factoring in a nutshell. Now this is factoring and solving an equation. So my next example, I'm just going to show you very, very basic factoring, no equation. It's just going to be an expression. So if I look at factoring another expression, this is one that's a little bit complicated, and I'll show you why, because I'm actually going to do two of them here. So x squared plus 5x minus 6, and I'm also going to show you one, x squared plus 5x plus 6. So this is one of my favorite expressions here, simply because they look very same. They look basically identical. The only difference, if you notice, is this plus or minus 6. So this is why it's important to pay attention to your signs, because if I were to factor, let's start on the right side this time. If I start on the right side, let's go ahead and write our factors of 6, because once again, we're reading this from right to left. I'm going to go ahead and write all my factors of 6. My factors of 6 are 6 and 1 and 3 and 2. Those are my only factors of 6 that I have for this equation. So if I take my factors of 6, once again, I'm reading it from right to left. Factors of 6 that add up to give me 5. Well, the factors of 6 that add up to give me 5 are these pair right here, 3 and 2. 3 plus 2 gives me 5. 3 times 2 gives me 6. So there's my two factors. So I'm going to, once again, I'm going to set up my basic. This is what I call my bones right here. It's the foundation of factoring. And I'm going to plug in my numbers, 3 and 2. Once again, the larger of these two numbers gets my sign of my x value. So since my sign of my x value here is a positive, I'm going to plug in that is a positive 3. From positive 3, how do I get to 5? Do I do plus 2 or minus 2? Well, positive 3 plus 2 is what gives me that positive 5. Now, I told you I was going to do two of them here. So starting in this first one, if you noticed, we had to add to get to 5. This one, we're looking at factors of 6 that subtract to give me 5. Well, if I use the same numbers that I did over here, 3 minus 2 subtracts to give me 1. It doesn't subtract to give me 5. So there's our big issue. So instead, I have to use my other factors, 6 and 1. If I notice 6 minus 1, that's what gives me that 5. So that's why it's very important to pay attention to the sign of your last term here, known as the constant. That's why it's important to pay attention to the sign of our constant, because if I don't, I may mess up and choose the wrong factors inadvertently and therefore mess up the equation. So x and 6 this time, x and 1. Once again, sign of the larger number gets the sign of my middle term. So therefore my 6 is going to get a positive. From a positive 6 to get to a 5, I need to do minus 1. 6 minus 1 is what gives me a positive 5. 6 times 1 is what gives me that 6. And there's our factoring. Now, for these past 3 examples, I've done one where it's pretty simple. Our number in the front here is just a 1. Notice the thing in front of the x squared, there's nothing there. We call that the understood 1. Well, that's easy. So let's start looking at one where that number's not 1, where that's a little bit different number. So let's take an equation. Let's say 3x squared. Now, sorry, I'm making this up in my head, so I'm going to have to think about it for a second. And let's put 10x. Okay, so 3x squared minus 10x plus 8. Now, I'm not sure how this is going to turn out. Like I said, I kind of made it up in my head to hopefully get some good numbers, but we may end up with fractions here at the end. But that's okay. We like fractions. That's our first favorite F word. So, if I start here, that's the big difference. I can't start reading this from right to left, because if I start that, I'm looking at factors of 8 that add up to give me 10. Well, if I think of all the factors of 8, there's only 8 and 1 and 4 and 2. These are the only factors of 8. If I try to add both of these together, I'm not going to get to 10. So these don't work. So I have to do something a little bit different. I'm going to take this 3, and I don't like this 3. It was easy when the problems didn't have the number in the front. So let's make this problem look similar to the other problems. And how we're going to do that is we're going to take this 3, and we are going to multiply it by the last number. Okay, we're going to take this 3 and we're going to move it to the last number. So this turns into x squared minus 10x. And now if you notice here, 3 times 8 gives me 24. Now this problem looks exactly the same as the previous problems that we've done. We have a 1 in front of our x squared. We have our basic numbers. Now we can look at factoring. So, factors of 24 that add up to give me 10. So let's think of the factors of 24. We have 24 and 1. We have 12 and 2. Now be careful, because if you notice, 12 minus 2 gives me 10. But we're not looking for minus. What we're looking for here is plus. So I can't do that because that adds to give me 14. That's different. Then we have 8 and 3. Then 6 and 4. And those are all the factors of 24. So which of these pairs add up to give me 10? If you notice, the only pair that added up to give me 10 here, 6 and 4. So those are my two factors. We set this problem up exactly the same as we did the other problems. I still set it up in my bones or my foundation of factoring, and then I'm still going to apply my signs the same way. So if you notice, the sign of the larger number down here gets a sign of the middle. So this one's a little different than the previous problems we've done. So I have a 6 and a 4. 6 is obviously larger, so it is going to get the negative sign. And then from negative 6, how do I get to negative 10? So if I do negative 6 plus 4, that's going to give me to negative 2. But if I do negative 6 minus 4, that gives me negative 10. So if you notice, negative 6, negative 4 gives me negative 10. Negative 6 times negative 4 gives me positive 24. Now, this is where we have to be careful, because we did one thing different at the very beginning of this problem, which means we're going to have to do something different at the end of the problem. If you notice at the beginning, I multiplied by 3. Well, if we think about how we undo things, or the opposite, what is the opposite of multiplication? Division. So if we multiply by the number at the top, we then have to undo it to divide by the number. So now I'm going to take this and I'm going to divide both of these numbers by 3. And therefore I can simplify. X minus 6 divided by 3 is 2. In my other factor, x minus. Now this kind of looks weird, but if you notice, 4 and 3 don't simplify, so I can leave this as 4/3. But looks weird. We don't like the fact that we have a fraction in our factoring. This isn't quite right. It doesn't look right. So we can actually rewrite how this looks. So my first one, x minus 2, stays the same, because that one looks nice and pretty. This one doesn't look nice and pretty. It has a number on the bottom. So we're going to take our number on the bottom here, and we're actually going to slide it up in front of that x, which therefore turns us into 3x minus 4. And there is our factor. So essentially, this is the very basics of factoring. It's not going into any of the special cases or any of the complex factoring. This is just very foundational. This will help you get ready for Algebra 2. If you're starting into Algebra 2, or if you just need a refresher of Algebra 2 moving into some more advanced courses such as college algebra or pre-calculus, this is a way you can do that. But this is the overall basics of factoring. So once again, I hope you enjoyed this. Subscribe, leave comments of what you want to see next. I'll hopefully get to them pretty soon. And remember, guys, life is hard. Let me simplify the math. Hey guys, I hope y'all enjoyed this video. I'm hoping to make some more content that's personalized just for you. So if you want to hear some math tips, or if you want to know how to simplify math a little bit more, first off, hit that subscribe button, and then hit in the comments. Let me know what topics you want me to cover, and I'll make sure to get to it. Thanks.